is I'm going to talk a little bit. How many of you have heard me speak before? Okay, I hope you have really bad memories. I'm going to say a few familiar things about my background and how I came to be a writer, and then I will talk about the new book, Name Sapphire. It's only been out for 8 days. And then I hope to leave a lot of time for questions, so I hope you will have questions. But before we do that, can I say how excited I am to be in a library? After, of course, independent bookstores where you should all get your books, libraries are very much my thing. So I use 5 library systems back home on a weekly basis. During the pandemic, the library actually called to check on me. It's a true story. And I celebrated my 50th birthday by being able to take my children back to our public library for the very first time. So I love my libraries, and I thank everyone here. So my journey to becoming a writer started, I can't believe in March I'm going to have to say it was 27 years ago. I was sent to Krakow, Poland as a diplomat for the US State Department. Now, I did not go to Poland to work on the war or the Holocaust. I actually went over there to stamp visas and passports and help Americans when they got in trouble overseas. But at that moment in time, Poland and its neighbors had just come out of a half century of communism. And all during those decades, they had no free speech, and they were cut off from the West. And so any issues they had to resolve from World War II were just left frozen in time. And in the mid-1990s, they were suddenly saying, like, what about returning property and preserving the camps and all sorts of really difficult questions. So I arrived in Poland. I was a young girl in my early 20s. And now you all do the math and figure out how old I was. I am now, I'm 51. But when I went to Poland, I was alone. So I went halfway around the world with no family. And if you think back to the mid-1990s, we had no cell phones and we had no internet. And so I was quite isolated. And as a Jewish woman, I went looking for the synagogue. I went looking for community. And so I was going to Shabbat services every Friday night. It was Orthodox, which was quite an education for me. And I was at the rabbi's house every Saturday for lunch. And the elderly survivors who still live in Poland, and if you want to know about them, please feel free to ask me, they became like grandparents to me, which thinking back now, it was a really good fit because I had lost 3 of my grandparents at a very young age. And so to be able to live in this community and have them embrace me was very special. And the US government, they saw that I had a relationship with the people and they had these issues that needed working on, and they said, okay, you handle all that stuff from the war, go. We were only 8 Americans in Krakow, so it was very informal. And for 2.5 years, that was my job, was working on issues related to the war. And I won't go too deeply into that because that's not the main subject of our talk, but again, if you'd like to talk about it, I'm certainly happy to do so during the Q&A. So, after my time in Poland, I did not continue on in diplomatic service. I came back to the United States and I went to law school, but I knew that I wanted to write a book that reflected my experiences in Poland. I knew I wanted to write a novel. You might say, well, how did you know that? Going back even further in time, I was one of those little kids who always wanted to be a writer. And it was never short stories, it was never poems, it was always going to be a novel. But all through my many years in school, I had plenty of time to write. When I lived abroad, I had time. I could never get started. And you know what I mean. I see a few heads nodding because I bet many of you have a project in your closet that you want to get off the ground, and you just can't do it. And for me, that was the novel. So, the turning point in my life was 9/11. I went to law school in Philadelphia. I graduated from Penn Law, and I started practicing at a big Philadelphia law firm on September 4th, 2001. It was a Tuesday. 1 week later, 9/11 happened, and I had an epiphany, and please forgive me, I'm going to use a flip expression to describe a really serious day. But I call my life epiphany, dear God, I don't want to die at the law firm. And what I meant by that was that being a lawyer was a fine and admirable profession. I love the law. I mean, I make baby lawyers for my day job. I teach law school. But I also had a deeper dream of being a novelist. And if I had been a 9/11 victim, I never would have realized my dream. I realized that I didn't have forever and I had to get started. So I took a course. Who said they're from Philadelphia? Villanova here, Philadelphia, some folks. I took a course at Temple Night School. I teach at Rutgers, but this was Temple Night School. And the course, right at 15th and Market, and the course was called Write Your Novel This Year. And they later changed that to Write Your Novel This Month. I would not take that. That sounds really scary. But I took Write Your Novel This Year, and I started working on my first book. However, it was not a hop, skip, and a jump from that epiphany to books and books. It was, in fact, 5 years and 39 publisher rejections until the last known publisher on earth, and I should stop calling them that because they're my current publisher, but the last known publisher on earth made a tiny little offer for my first book, Commandant's Girl, and away we went. Now, since that time, things have gone okay, and lots of people in publishing would act like they knew it all along, but I have rejection letters from all of them. The other catch when I became a serious writer was that even though I was going to be serious about it, I was still a new attorney at a big city law firm, and I had $1,000 a month in student loan debt to repay. And so I couldn't just go sit in a castle and write these books now that I was serious about it. It had to coexist with the day job. So I used to write my books from 5 to 7 every morning. I'm a morning person, before I went to the firm. And this persisted for many years. Now, I have 3 middle schoolers. They get up really early for middle school. And we have 6 pets. So I don't get 5 to 7 in the morning anymore. I have to find other times. But that was the drill. So I wrote my first book, which was Commandant's Girl, had a sequel and a prequel, and I've written any number of books in between because Name Sapphire is my 12th book. So if you want to ask me about any of my other books, feel free, but if you give away the ending, I'm going to shush you. But let's talk about Name Sapphire, which just came out a week ago yesterday. So in order to tell you about the new book, I have to tell you where I got the idea from. Because although I lived among the survivors, I don't write their stories. I don't think those are mine to tell. I need a little more distance in the material. And so when I want to write a book, I actually go looking for that bit of history that I want to write about. And it's going to inspire my book, because I don't write actual true stories. So anytime someone describes my book as based on actual events, I cross it out and I say inspired by. I don't want to stake too large a claim around what is true. So when I'm going looking for a bit of history, I am looking for what I call the gasp and the questions. So the gasp is, if I can find a piece of history so fresh and so untold that after more than a quarter century of working with the war, it makes me gasp, I'm hopeful I'm onto something that you'll feel the same way about. And in the case of Name Sapphire, the gasp was learning about a train that was headed from Brussels to Auschwitz with people imprisoned inside. And an attempt by a few brave young people to stop that train in its tracks and free the prisoners inside. So I gasped. And then I had questions. So I wanted to know, how had these people been brave enough to attempt such a thing? And at the same time, why hadn't other people tried to do the same? And so this is where the idea was born. Now, in Name Sapphire, we first meet Hannah Martel. Hannah is a young German Jewish woman who lost everything in a Kristallnacht type of pogrom in Berlin. She lost her fiance, she lost her unborn child, and she's a political activist, and so she needs to get out of Germany. She hops a ship for North America, but her ship is turned away from the United States and Cuba. Now, if this sounds familiar, it was inspired by the true story of the ship called the St. Louis. But I don't call my ship the St. Louis because I had to mess around with the dates, and I didn't want to do that with the real ship. So Hannah's ship is turned back to Europe, and she finds herself in Brussels living with her long-lost cousin Lily. They haven't seen each other in years. Lily is altogether different because Lily is affluent, married to a doctor, she has a young son, and Lily's trying to pretend like the war isn't happening to her, even though she's Jewish. But Hannah needs to get out of Europe still. And so Hannah connects with the Sapphire line. Sapphire is a resistance organization, and its endeavor is to help the downed Allied airmen get out from behind enemy lines. That's what they do. And this is inspired by a real-life network called the Comet Line. And so Sapphire is headed by a woman named Micheline. Micheline and Hannah strike up a deal. Micheline says, I will help you get out of Europe for good if you help with the work of the Sapphire line. But Hannah gets in too deep with Sapphire, and through a series of mishaps and mistaken identity, her work results in the arrest of Lily, Lily's husband, and Lily's young son. And so when Lily's family is placed on that train headed for Auschwitz, it is Hannah who endeavors to free them. So that is codename Sapphire. I just found out, walking in here 10 minutes ago, it did hit the New York Times. It just barely hit the New York Times. Very tough these days, and it hit the list, so I'm very relieved and thankful. I'm very grateful for all of the support this week. But I could go on and on about lots of things, but can I pause? And I'm hoping you have a lot of questions for me. I will talk about this book, the older books, Writing, Poland, Life, but the only thing I have to caution you, I teach law school by day, and my answers are really long. So, what do you want to talk about? I hope someone has questions for me. Anyone? Yes.
Okay.
Esther, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I won't ask about when your next book is coming out.
I'll answer that too, but go ahead.
Okay. There's a whole genre now about of books dealing with the Holocaust. With all the books with the Paris this and the Paris that, and Jenny Blum and Balsam, all of these, it's this whole genre. I just wonder sometimes if some of the truth is blotted out when so many of them come to a happy ending. They find their family, or they find their lost love, or people actually help them. When the truth is that more did not, more actively, in fact, aided in the extermination and the evacuation of Jews from where they were. So, is there a way to make this clear to people? I mean, I know, my husband knows, I'm sure a lot of people here know, but there are people who don't. Is there any way to get those facts through?
So, you know, you've asked so many good questions in one question. I kind of want to unpack them all. It's very difficult when you sit down to write about this material, because although I lived among the people, and I consider my books love songs to the people who lived through that era, it's very daunting. And this is going to be a long answer, but I'll tell you a story about it. When I was working on my first book, Commandant's Girl, I watched Band of Brothers. Did you ever see Band of Brothers? It's the finest thing ever put on film. I will fight you on that. I think it's the best thing ever put on film. And so I was watching episode 8, which is where they liberate a concentration camp. And it was so well done and so visceral that it stopped me in my tracks. And my books generally, other than this book, my books really don't go into camps because that's not my space. And so I was like, who am I to write dinner parties in Krakow when this was going on, you know, an hour away? And the answer, I stopped writing, like it was daunting, and the answer I finally came to was because those dinner parties really were going on 60 kilometers away. And so these are different aspects of the war, which is not to say we should take it lightly ever. If you read my books, you know, there's quite often not happy endings. Some endings are happy and some endings are not happy, and some endings are not known, because people didn't always find out what happened to people, and that is just the hard truth. So I approach the material with a kind of reverence. So after the gasp and the questions, the very next thing I must ask myself is, can I do this respectfully? Because no matter how good a topic, if the answer to that was no, it would go no further. The other thing that's super important is I think you have to be really clear about what is true in your book. And that's where the author's note comes in, right? Because if I'm going to change dates on something, I'm going to say it there, you know? Yeah, where you say like, I had to alter the dates of the ship, so people know what is real and what is not. And I think that's a really important thing. But I do think these books serve a very important function. You've mentioned two of my favorites. Jenna Blum is one of my dearest friends, and Ron Balson, I'm seeing at an event in Boca tomorrow, and he's the closest thing I get to spending time with my dad since my dad's no longer here. So, I think the books are important. We just have to undertake them with a certain trepidation. And then the other thing is, I am working on another book. Too early to say much. They come out about every 2 years now, and this one just came out this week. So all I can tell you about the new book, it has a story during the war, it has a story after the war, and there's a mystery about an object that connects the two stories.
Did I tell you to hurry up?
I used to write a book a year, but I'm so much older, and the books are so much harder. And I actually like every 2 years, because it takes so much to launch a book these days, from my family, from everyone on social media. I can't ask that every year. Like, I would rather step back and pay it forward and have every other year be like a bigger, feeling. Thank you. I told you they were long. Now everyone's scared to ask me anything. Anyone? Yes.
So you have 6 pets. What pets do you have, and what are their names?
Oh my goodness. So we didn't mean to have 6 pets. So we started with a simple cat when my children were babies, and this cat knew not to ask for anything, because I had 3 children under the age of 2. So we have a cat named Turquoise, who's really good, can catch a mouse if there is one, doesn't ask for anything. Easy, right? Then, at some point, the day camp had a lottery to win the lizard at the end of the summer. So we have a Nigerian Euromastic lizard named Merlin, who does nothing. He's fine, he asks for nothing. He just eats lentils. You could leave him alone for days and he's fine. So Merlin's okay. Who came next? Then came, my son is a bird named Donut. Birds are the worst pets ever. I can't say enough bad things about them. The bird is messy and noisy and needy and everything, so that's the bird. My pet, only one of them I take care of. My pet is Scoop, and Scoop is a yellow lab, and he's almost 3. If you're my friend on social media, you have seen Scoop, because Scoop is the only grumpy Labrador on the planet. And the reason he's named Scoop is because when I grew up with chocolate Labradors, and all I wanted growing up, I wanted a yellow lab named Scoop, like Scoop of chocolate, Scoop of vanilla. So now I have my yellow lab named Scoop, and then we have my daughter we got a bunny, because the bunny someone had let out in the neighborhood, so we have a bunny. And then we have a kitten, a calico, that my daughter just got for her bat mitzvah, named Luna, and she's kind of a lunatic. She attacks the bunny. So, like today, attacks the bunny. Yes?
I have a question about your process.
Okay.
You just described so succinctly about your book that just came out. Is fascinating. You talk about a series of mishaps. Do you plot everything out in advance? How do you work?
Writer's process. So if you've ever heard writers talk before, has anyone heard of plotters and pantsers? Has anyone heard this description? There's 2 types of writers. There's a caveat at the end, it's not that clear, but the plotters are those dear souls who write everything chronologically, they outline and they make it look nice before they go on. You can tell by the way I describe them that that's not me. I am a pantser, and pantser stands for by the seat of your pants. Okay, my style comes from a book. There's a book by Natalie Goldberg called Writing Down the Bones, and she takes a Zen Buddhist approach to writing where you don't stop your hand. She also calls it throwing up on the page, but really, I go bleh for 3 or 4 months, and all these words come out, and then you have to make sense of them. This is a terrible way to write a book. If you can do it a different way, I would totally do it. But let me say, there was a caveat to that. So I'm a pantser, however. My last book, some of you might have read, it was the pandemic book, The Woman with the Blue Star. It was about the Jewish people who hid in the sewer. I turned that book into my editor. That was my 11th book. I'm like, here. She's like, no. No? No. I had written a total stinker of a book, like a dud, on my 11th book. And I had to rewrite 95% of that book in 5 months. I never want to do that again. By the way, when that happens, when that bad news happens, here's what happens. First, you wring your hands, you shake an angry fist at the sky, And then I always think of a quote from The Godfather Part 2, where he said, "This is the business we have chosen," and you get down to work. But I don't want to do that again. So I'm a reformed pantser. I do a rough outline before I start and show it to my editor, so I don't go that egregiously off track again.
Cool,
Yes, thank you.
I was
Yes.
curious about your work at the Pentagon.
Oh, yes. So, life sort of goes in these random directions. I have to back up before the Pentagon to tell you how I got there. Undergrad, I went to George Washington University in DC, great school, but a little bit pricey living down there. And I was largely putting myself through college. So I couldn't take one of those lofty internships for free on Capitol Hill. I had to work. And I had a job at a law firm in DC, and I was what they called a clerk messenger. And all I did was deliver packages all over Washington for, I don't know, $6 an hour or whatever it was back then. And the reason I'm telling you this is the managing partner from that law firm became the Secretary of the Army years later. And I was living in Europe. I picked up USA Today or the Herald Tribune, and I saw that he had gotten that job, and I said, "Can I come work for you after graduation?" And he brought me in as he was politically appointed. He brought me in. And I only spent a year at the Pentagon before moving over to the State Department. But I refer to that year as the year I saw the world from the shoulders of giants. That's paraphrasing Sir Isaac Newton, because I went with my boss everywhere. So we were at the Oklahoma City bombing 3 days after it happened, observing rescue and recovery. We helped the Pan Am Flight 103 families get their memorial at Arlington Cemetery. And the really formative piece for my books is that that year was the 50th anniversary of World War II. And I went around the globe to these commemorations with my boss, and I was in the Philippines and Corregidor, and I was in Bastogne in Belgium. But I was in a tiny little cabin in the Slovak mountains where a young girl had hidden paratroopers and partisans, and that actually became the inspiration for The Winter Guest, where she hides the airmen there. That was my year at the Pentagon. In way over my head, by the way. Yes. Yes.
How do you pick the names of your characters? Are they names of people you know, or are you just random?
How do I pick the names? Well, I started out as a pantser with like a rough idea of who these people are, so I kind of don't pick. Someone once said that plotters are building scaffolding, but when you're a pantser, it's like an archaeological dig, where you're like picking up an object and brushing it up. So as I'm meeting them, like I'm kind of seeing maybe a name, but there's several caveats and several things you have to think about. First of all, if you're writing about 2 or 3 women, you need the names to be distinct so people can keep them apart. This is a little problematic in Europe because, frankly, a lot of female names end with an A. Your Evas, your Alas, your Annas, and so on, Emmas, and so on. So you have to try and differentiate the names. Then you have to make sure you have a name that's appropriate for your country, right? That's important. Then you have to check the era for names. So there's these databases of like names for babies born in 1920 Paris, where you can see what some of the plausible names were. Then you have to make sure you didn't use them in a different book, because they have to tell the book. So there's a lot of like names switching around, and that sort of thing. Yes. That was a pretty short answer, see? If you're not. Yes?
I find that in books and in movies, even TV shows or whatever, there is a way that it seems like everyone is going now where they keep going back in time, and a lot of people don't explain that they're going back in time. You're saying, who is this person? I find it in books, I find it in movies. Is it something that you find in the
Do you mean
writers-
back in time within the same era, or do you mean time jumping in books?
Yeah. Let's say, for example, Yellowstone.
Yellowstone. I haven't watched it, but there's like that 1893 and that 1923.
Well,
I
here
want
it
to
is,
try
Kevin
that.
Costner, and in 1 second, they're showing a scene from when he was a younger man, but they don't tell you that they're going back to that scene. You're saying, who are these people? I find the same in books as well, and especially when there are characters with, Anna and Diana and and jumping back and forth, and with the names I find, especially in my book clubs, most of these girls haven't been in Europe, so it's quite confusing. Do you see it at all?
I mean, you try to be as clear as possible. So I don't jump much. I have written 1 or 2 books that were modern historical, but most of mine are going to be within like kind of that era, at least for right now. So I haven't done it as much. For me, it's more a question of if I'm writing about, say, 3 women, right? Then I'm trying to braid their stories together for you in a way that makes sense. And the biggest thing I've learned about that is it's not always like a 1, 2, 3. Sometimes it becomes like 1, 2, 2, 3, 2, you know, depending who needs to tell the story at that moment. So I haven't jumped time as much as some people, but I share your confusion.
I mean, maybe there is a good way to bridge that, okay? You know, I don't know if you would put a
I think
date
if I
or
went
something.
to, I think if I went to Zigzag, my editor would probably rein me in, is my guess. I would hope. She's good with that. Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. You don't have to answer this if you don't want to, I think it's just too difficult. You and a lot of the other authors will write about what happened. Do you see a parallel between then and now? Today, a report came out that over 1/3 of American Jews are now frightened for their future here. Do you see something, we used to say it can't happen here, and the answer is, oh, yes, it can, and it is. Just look at the beatings and so on. Do you see a link, an answer, a solution, a road, something?
You know, I recently, around Holocaust Remembrance Day, International Holocaust Remembrance Day on January 27th, I was asked to write about like why Holocaust literature is more relevant than ever, and it's certainly some of these themes that you're talking about. People used to ask me like, mostly about anti-Semitism in Poland, but the answer is always like, yes, but what's going on here in the United States? It's not just anti-Semitism, it's a lot of prejudice and division. So you had asked me about the books before, and I want to say that one of the greatest things that I love about these books is, imagine a book of mine. I have these women who, through history, would have lived on a very certain path. But then the war happens, and they're tested. They're like thrown off that path, and they're tested. And they meet other people, other women or other people, who they never would have met except for history. And when you see these women from such different backgrounds come together to help one another, I hope that when people read these books, their lives right now, like some of what's going on now, I think we could bridge that. So yes, I am concerned, but I really think the answer is just education and dialogue. That's all we can do.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes.
Has any movie studio or Netflix offered to, you know, make a series or a movie out of any of your books?
So if you had asked me that, I think maybe the last time I was here, someone had asked me that, I would have said from your mouth to God's ears. Nothing had happened. But actually, one of my books is optioned. It's Lost Girls of Paris, and it is optioned for, it was a movie option, now it's a limited run TV option. So the option is out there. I'm going to tell you, it's in development. For me, most of the time, I don't even hear about it. Like, they're doing whatever they do, and if they need something, they tell me. But the coolest was last year, I was able to Zoom with the screenwriter. And she was supposed to be asking me questions about the book. Screenwriters are so smart and so good with storytelling that as she was talking, I was scribbling notes furiously. I loved it. So it's still very much a long shot, but I believe that if anyone can do it, it's this particular screenwriter. Yes, all the
I just finished Blue Star.
Yes.
What prompted you to write about that aspect of the resistance in Krakow at the time? And what research did you do?
This is a great question, thank you. If people will allow me, has anyone read The Woman with the Blue Star? A few people. So let me go. The Woman with the Blue Star was my book before this. It was my last book. It was the one during the pandemic. So I'm going to answer, this will be a long one too, but the inspiration, the gasp for writing The Woman with the Blue Star was learning that there was a group of people that survived the war by living in a sewer. So they didn't just run through the sewer on their way out of town. They actually lived in that sewer for more than a year. And I was just riveted by this. The actual sewer was in Lviv, Poland, not in Krakow, where the true story took place. But when I did that big rewrite, number one, I moved the story to Krakow for various reasons. But I had done a lot of research, but I actually said, I'm going to make lemonade out of lemons, and I'm going to go to Poland for research, because I had not been back to Poland in 17 years. There are people I really want to see in Poland before it's too late. I'll go do research. So I booked myself a really nice trip to Poland, mom only, good airfare, good hotel, and I booked that trip for March 11th, 2020. And so as COVID was bubbling up, my publisher, they said, we don't think you should go to Poland. I said, I'm going to Poland, and I'm going to wear one of those masks, because we didn't know what it was. The flight shut down on March 11th, and thank God they did, because I had an emergency appendectomy on March 12th. I would have been in the air, so it all worked out for a reason. I never got to go to Poland for that particular book, and I had to use, there are many wonderful things you can use now, virtual archives, maps, periodicals, photographs, correspondence, all of that comes together when you can't get somewhere to research a book. But since you mentioned The Woman with the Blue Star, I just wanted to share that I finished writing that book during the pandemic. So I didn't set out to do it, but I was writing a book about isolation and the search for human connection while we were all in our houses and kind of doing car parades and Zooms and trying to figure out how to connect. And it was this very powerful moment, because I would never analogize what we went through to the war or the Holocaust. By no means am I doing that. But I really felt this connection where I had a mom in 1940s Poland who one moment was living in a modern apartment and the next minute was trying to keep her family alive in the sewer. She never expected that. And I was feeling like, well, you know, I never thought in 2020 that I would be asking, can I get meat and can I get toilet paper and how am I going to educate my children? Like, it was that sudden moment. The other thing that was very resonant about writing that book during the pandemic was this. You know, people say to me, well, how did they live in the sewer? Like, how could they possibly do that for so long? They didn't think they were going into the sewer for a year. They thought they were going in for a couple hours, a couple days, and a couple weeks, because it's kind of about like what you can incrementally handle. And all I kept thinking is, does anyone remember 2 weeks to flatten the curve? Like, we didn't think we were going to be home for all that time. I don't think we could have gotten our heads around. So The Woman with the Blue Star, very close to my heart from the pandemic. You know, all of the books, I should say, they are written alongside the seasons of my life, just like other authors. So, you know, I know which book I was writing when I had baby twins. I know which book I was writing when, you know, my dad passed. I know which book I was writing during the pandemic. And it's kind of like this parallel to your own life in a way. Thank you for letting me say that about that book. Really appreciate it. Yes? It's like picking between your children, right? I don't even have that many pets. No, I mean, Codename Sapphire is the new baby, so special place in my heart. Commandant's Girl is the firstborn. Orphan's Tale, which was 9, was the one that broke out, so I was not an overnight success. It was like my 9th book that broke out. Lost Girls has probably done the best. I have a little weak spot in my heart for the underdog books, like the ones no one's ever heard of. I have a few of those. And I have one that I love called The Last Summer at Chelsea Beach, which is World War II on the home front, which is Philadelphia and Atlantic City. So all kind of different. Yes. Yes.
I have to tell you, when I visualized The Blue Star, so much so that if you ever turned it into a movie, I would never go see it because I've got all the characters and all the scenes and everything. You did a beautiful job. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That was writing the sewer. You know, when you start a book, you say, can I spend a year or two with this subject? Like whether it's the sewer or when I wrote The Orphan's Tale, like, can I spend I don't love the circus, like am I going to spend a year or two with the circus? So that sewer feeling, I understand. And there's a really good nonfiction book called In the Sewers of Lviv that tells about the real sewer. For Codename Sapphire, if you want to hear more about the train, there's an actual book called The 20th Train, which is the nonfiction account. And as I was writing, I had mentioned Codename Sapphire on a Zoom, and I heard from 2 sisters in California whose parents were on that train. Yes?
Hi. So do your children read, and do they read any of your books?
Do they
Read any of your books?
Yeah, so my kids are only 12 and 14, but one of my 12-year-olds who likes to read older, she's read about 3 or 4 of my books, so that's been very special. My books are, and they can be read by my books are kind of PG-13, right? Like, the war stuff is super difficult, but it's not like the content like is like adult, you know, I'm not like something that my kid could read as long as they're ready to deal with the war. And she's very mature. I mean, when we went to Washington, she wanted to go to the Holocaust Museum, so she kind of thinks on that level, so she's ready for it. But I don't know if the other 2 would be. Yeah.
What books do you like to read? What authors do you like to read?
I am a voracious reader. Like I said, indie bookstores, but libraries, because just between me and the kids, the volume of books that we need, you know, I need libraries for that. I read everything. A couple times I've done something called 100 Days of Books, where every day for 100 days I posted a book that I loved. And I have 3 Pinterest boards. That's the only thing I use Pinterest for, with all those books. If you ever want them, you can see them there. I read, I don't know about you, but I read in fits and starts. Like, I will have nothing that interests me for months and then a bunch of stuff all at once. So last month I was on a little bit of a thriller bender. Just the Nicest Couple by Mary Kubica came out. And then I'm trying to think more, I just read something, but of course I'm really tired, so I'm not thinking of it. I'm doing an event tomorrow with Ron Balston. His books are amazing for World War II. I also read lots of modern stuff. Sometimes people say, I need a lighter book, like I just can't read anything heavy. I have to tell you, there's a debut called When Franny Stands Up by Eden Robbins, 1B. She's an author out of Chicago. And it's basically like a Marvelous Mrs. Maisel kind of thing, if I'm saying that right. I heard her read in North Carolina last week, and she was amazing. So I really, really think if you want a light book, but those are just, I mean, I could go on for days and miss so many author friends. So those are just a few suggestions I can think of right now. Yes. You can go ahead, Esther, go ahead. I love it.
You wrote about the sewers, and I know that when I read The Lady Who Star, it reminded me, I don't know if I read a book or I just saw the movie or the film about the girl with the green sweater.
Yep. She was one of the people in the sewer in Lviv, although there were more than a dozen people, so some of what I talked about was compilation there. It's not just one. I don't base it on any one person. I've never had the ability to speak to her about it, but that was real. After I wrote The Orphan's Tale, the niece of the circus performer who inspired my book, I heard from her, which was very special.
Wow.
So yeah, no, it's a wonderful thing. So I might have answered all the questions, but yes, go ahead.
I have one. I just got finished reading for the second time Sarah Vital's Shadow by Paul Theroux. Paul Theroux, in this particular book, I don't know if you know him or not, but he's a
I mean, I know of him, but I
he's a
haven't.
travel writer, and he's been around since the 60s, and he just talks about the anguish of being a writer, and oh my God, you know, you have to be a certain type of person, and you know, I'm so antisocial, and blah, blah, blah. Oh, he's still writing. So I wonder, you seem so well-adjusted. Are you really kind of like...
I seem so, what did you say? I seem so
well-adjusted.
well-adjusted. Oh, I'm a hot mess all the time, you know, with all of this. Like, my life is crazy, our house is squalor, it's all crazy. But you know what, there's lots of angsty parts to writing, whether it's the creative process or, you know, sweating how a book will do, or all the parts of the process. But I do believe if you're going to write and you're going to be busy, you must be very disciplined, right? Like, so let me tell you a secret. People think I do all this writing and I'm so prolific, and I'm not. I have no stamina. I'm a short burst writer, so if you gave me 8 hours, I don't know what to do with 8 hours. So I made this deal with myself. If I can't write long, I must write frequent. So I try and touch the paper like 7 days a week, even if it's only really, really short. But I do think that, for me, I take a business-like approach to writing, and here is why. I used to be an attorney, and if I had said, oh, I'm just not motivated to write a brief today, I would have lost my job. And so I do think, I mean, I come from a pretty practical family. Like, you went to an office and you had a job, you didn't sit in Starbucks with your feet up on the bench, you know? And so I do think that there's a way, if you want to do it, to move the ball forward every day in some capacity. So I just want to say thank you for welcoming me back to South Florida. I was very excited to be able to come. But really, I invite each and every one of you to find me online wherever you're hanging out, whether that is Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, email. This week I'm all like Sapphire, Sapphire. But after this, I'm just going to get back to talking about what I like to read and my dog Scoop. So I hope that you will find me online, and I have friends here who we've had relationship over, you know, more than a decade of this now, and it's very special. So I hope that we can continue the conversation. Thank you so much.